Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's theolog. I don't think anyone will be shocked about the topic for today, given what happened over the weekend. This is kind of my venue for exploring these topics. Although I'm not, just to let you know, going to be talking in depth about the assassination attempt on former President Trump or anything like that, because honestly, we still don't know a lot. Anyone who claims to, I don't want to say they're lying, but they probably think that they know more than they do. And this is not going to be so much about that as it is going to be talking about assassination, maybe the purposes of why people do these types of things, but also what the Bible has to say about several things, and especially maybe things that are tough to hear when it comes to some of the difficulties. But let's first look at a study that I found recently. And normally I start with the Bible, but I think this is important for thinking about this issue, and then I'll take you guys to the Bible verses. So this is a study from UVA, so that's the University of Virginia, for anyone who doesn't know. This was published almost a year ago, so it's maybe not the most up-to-date thing ever, but I think that it has a pretty important thing to say, especially here. So this is all like basically back last year when people were trying to figure out, well, if these two people run, how's it going to look, right? And so they look at Biden and Trump. But the thing that I thought was really interesting were these statistics down here. Say a staggering majority of both Biden and Trump voters believed electing officials from opposite party would result in lasting harm to the United States. That's not that surprising, right? Obviously, people believe that opposite political parties' decisions are going to make are going to harm the country. So that's not that crazy, I think. And then it says roughly half, 52% of Biden voters, 47% of Trump voters viewed those who supported the other party as threats to the American way of life. And this is where it becomes a little bit more worrisome here. And then he says about 40% of groups, 41% of Biden voters and 38% of Trump voters at least somewhat believed that the other side had become so extreme that it is acceptable to use violence to prevent them from achieving their goals. Now, I will say, I just want to point out how, because we'll just hear these statistics and we don't really know how they got them. So they gave us a PowerPoint. So I have here, and this is part of the problem, right? This is the questions. You can see that here, like where they got that, where they're getting all these things from. The one in the middle is the one about violence that I just read. At the bottom, which is probably very hard for you guys to see, but it says question 17 now, and this is like how in these reports, if you've ever done a phone, I hate them, but if you've ever done a phone poll, they'll write down, they'll give you very specific questions and they won't deviate from them, which is what I actually hate about it, because it doesn't allow you to explain your position at all, and sometimes they force you into a corner that you don't want to be in, because they're like yes or no, and you can't be like, well, neither. That's like not an option. So that's why I hate doing phone polls. I don't mind giving people my opinion on things, but don't like that I'm like forced to take a position. In any case, it says this is what the interviewer read. It says, now we have some questions about a different area of political opinions on which different people will likely hold differing opinions. Please read each of the following statements and indicate your level of agreement or disagreement. Percentages indicate the share who at least somewhat agreed with the statement on a 100-point scale. Now, somewhat agree is very different than extremely agree, right? So if they gave a 61% or higher, that adds to this statistic. So you do have to take a little bit of this with a grain of salt, because there's a chance that half of 41% here, for instance, is really or 38, whatever, is really only people who slightly agree. So it's worth saying that it doesn't mean that it's immediately 100% I'm going to kill anyone who disagrees with me, sort of thing. But it's still troublesome, right? I'm not getting out of that. This is partly the reason that we are just in such a state right now as a country. And so I want to talk about this. And what I'm going to do to do that is I'm going to use these different passages from Matthew and Luke. So this is in response to Assassination, and I've actually been thinking about this because I went back and I listened to this musical. This is a musical called Assassins by Stephen Sondheim, who you probably most know for what's that? Oh my gosh, the one with the people fighting in New York City. I actually don't like it that much, but a lot of people do. Not Sound of Music. Golly, what's it called? The one, I'm so pretty, I'm witty and gay. That song, whatever that is. West Side Story. There we go. West Side Story. That one is Stephen Sondheim, so you probably know him most for that. I believe it's Stephen Sondheim. Now I have to fact check myself, because that would be embarrassing. West Side Story. Oh, that's Bernstein. Oh, Lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. All right, so he was a part of that. But he also did Into the Woods. I'm sure, like, if you look at his Wikipedia page, you'll notice all sorts of stuff there. But anyway, so he did this play with this other guy, John Weidman, called Assassins, and it's basically just like it's not so much a play in the traditional sense of a story. It basically just follows these different assassins throughout American history, from like John Wilkes Booth up to even attempted assassinations. So John Hinckley with President Reagan, and it kind of examines all the different motives that they have in the thing and why they would do it. And so, like, there's this one song at the very end called Another National Anthem. And I'm just going to show you some of the lyrics here. So, Assassins, by the way, very much a rated R play. I don't know if plays have ratings, but if I were to rate it, I would give it a rated R. It has cursing and stuff in it. And it also has it is kind of a dark comedy, but it has some pretty dark humor in it. But there's this part at the end where all the assassins are gathered, and at the beginning of the play, they were told that they would win a prize if they shot a president, kind of like at a carnival. And they're at the end, and they've kind of all done these things, and they don't have a prize. But they talk about why they did what they did. So Czolgosz, that's the guy who shot President McKinley in 1901. So it says, I did it because it's wrong for one man to have so much service when other men have none. Booth, I'm sure many of you know who Booth is. I did to bring down the government of Abraham Lincoln and avenge the ravaged South. Hinckley, I did it to prove to her my everlasting love. Fromm, I did it to make them listen to Charlie. Zangara, I did it because my belly was on fire. I did it to Guiteau. I did it to preserve the Union and promote the sale of my book. I did it so my friends would know where I was coming from. And there's this kind of a phrase from this guy named Bick who had tried to kill President Nixon by flying a plane into the White House. It didn't happen, obviously. But where's my prize? Czolgosz, I did it because no one cared about the poor man's pain. I did it so I'd know where I was coming from. I want my prize. I did it because the bosses made my belly burn. I did it so he'd pay attention, so I'd have some place to come from and some place to go. Don't I get a prize? I did it because they said I'd be ambassador to France. I did it so they'd suffer in the North the way we suffered in the South. And it kind of goes on and on and on and things like that. But I like that idea of giving all the reasons why people do this sort of thing. And I'm not going to speculate on the Trump one. I don't know why. But I really do think it falls into two categories generally. And the two categories are, firstly, political, right? So someone like Czolgosz was an anarchist, and he believed that killing the president would help bring in, or Lee Harvey Oswald, right, who is a communist, believed that killing the president would lead to some sort of social or societal change, right? And then you also have people that are kind of crazy and are seeking fame, right? So there's a lot of people that do it for that reason as well. And so, and that certainly could happen today too. And so I basically put it in those two categories. I put it in political action, which is this is the only way that we're going to be able to get what we want. The other one is I want fame. I want to be remembered, and killing someone who's important ensures that I'm going to be remembered, right? I mean, even today, I can imagine some kid growing up going on Wikipedia and realizing that for even, if you assassinate someone or if you kill someone, you get your own Wikipedia page if it's important enough, right? Where people want to study you and think about you. And I could easily see someone taking that and going, oh, this is the way I'm going to be remembered, is I'm going to be the guy who killed whoever, right? It's not good, by the way. These are bad reasons. There's no, you're going to see my point here. But I wanted to point out that what Jesus would say about these things, or, I don't want to speak in such broad term maybe, but what things Jesus said that we can apply. So this one actually has a lot to do with fame generally. So some people say if you just seek to be famous, that's sinful, and they'll point you to Matthew 23. And so Jesus is talking about the Pharisees here and the way they act. And so this is what he says. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love their place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And so here I think Jesus is responding to this desire for fame that so many people have in the world. And I think that this one tackles pretty easily the idea that we should do things in order to be known or in order to be famous, right? That's not a good reason, especially not a good reason to kill anybody, but definitely not a good reason to do anything, right? Because we're not here to become famous. Fame is fleeting. It's going to be gone one day. Eventually, over time, people will forget. I mean, that's part of the kind of the irony of some of this, right? Is that you're remembered kind of as a weird historical footnote, and even if you succeed, right? If I hadn't told you guys that Cholgosh was the one who killed President McKinley, you might not even know who President McKinley is, right? Or Guiteau here was the one who assassinated President Garfield. Those aren't even presidents that we're aware of. I think McKinley is most famous for being the person who preceded Teddy Roosevelt. So it's interesting, right? Because you might want to do these types of things. Someone might want to do them, but you realize that, it might not end up being that important in the grand scheme of things anyway. But anyway, fame, fleeting, not good. So what about political violence, right? What about using violence in order to achieve your means? Well, we're going to look at the Gospel of Matthew here, especially this famous part where Jesus is being arrested. So it says, this is when Judas shows up. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then one of the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way?" In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. And so this is really important when we talk about violence in the church and how Christians are supposed to act. So you notice that Jesus is going to be arrested here. And one of his disciples, who's identified as Peter, tries to defend Jesus, right? He takes out his sword and attacks a slave of the high priest and cuts off his ear, right? Malchus is the slave's name. And so if there's a place to go to see political violence or violence being justified, this would be the place to see it. And what does Jesus tell him? He says, "No, we don't do that. If you draw the sword, you'll die by the sword." Or more famously, those who live by the sword die by the sword. And so, this is why, really, Christianity has rejected violence, political violence over time. I mean, of course, it happened in Christian history and Middle Ages and stuff like that, but you definitely don't see early Christians rising up in violent rebellion against the Roman Empire. You just don't see that being important because this is something that Jesus warned against. But today, right, if we have, let's say even 20% of the country saying it's all right to use political violence against your opponents, this would be our response to that, and to say no, it isn't. And people will usually bring what I'm going to show you up next, right? So this is an alternative. This is an article from Christianity Today called "An Alternative to the Bonhoeffer Option." So just want to give you the historical things. You might see Bonhoeffer option and not know what that is. So Bonhoeffer was a German theologian who participated in plots as a very, I don't think he's as central as some people make him out to be, but as a very kind of tertiary figure around the side to assassinate Hitler. Now, most of us would say, assassination is wrong, you should never do it, etc., etc. But, right, I think many people would say Hitler is the one accepting, case where you are allowed to use violence to end that. And that's because, of course, we see this on the other side with the Holocaust and things like that going on. Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. And the reason I agree with that, I don't agree with that, is not because I'm like a Hitler fan. I'm not at all. But because this is a very dangerous opinion to have. And Bonhoeffer himself was like, I really might be sinning in taking this stance. Like, he was very humble about it in his own diaries, and so I give him a lot of credit. But there are other people, right? And so this whole article, we're not going to read it, but this whole article is about another theologian who took a resistive approach, but not a physically resistive approach in the Netherlands against the occupying Nazis. In any case, right, the danger of this is everyone sees the other person as a Hitler. That's why this is a dangerous option for Christians, right, and people in general, is all of us can agree that Hitler is Hitler, but as you can probably tell from just being on Facebook, you can find all sorts of people saying Trump is Hitler, or Biden is Hitler, or this politician is Hitler, right? And you can see the rhetoric that's built up in the country over the last 10 years, really, 8 years, where people have continually demonized the other side, and it's not hard to see people realize that just anyone can be Hitler, and that's why this isn't great, right? That's why political violence, when we are not rooted in Jesus, seems like a very good option for changing the world and making it better, because we think nothing's changing, it's all bad, the only way we're going to do this is through radical change and someone has to die, and that's where it gets dicey. I would also say that it's, this, like, correcting behavior ultimately falls in the Lord's hands, but in the arms of the state, right? And that, in the case of World War II, it was corrected by other states who had to crush Nazi Germany, right? I know that, like, people want quick options, but also I want to point out that I've never seen an assassination actually work in the sense of doing what it's supposed to do, right? So Chaglas shoots McKinley because he's an anarchist and he wants to take down the capitalist class. Did that do anything? No, it actually just led to a crackdown on anarchism in the United States, right? Not that I really care, but that's what happened. Or anything else, right? It's just so obvious that these things tend to backfire. And I think you've seen that, right? Just politically speaking, in the fallout of the Trump assassination, whether you don't like Trump or you do, like, his polls have been way up since it happened. So it's not something that ever works out for the person. And I actually want to in order to make this point clear and just point out how Jesus is opposed to this type of thinking, is what he has is the same story of Jesus' arrest, but from Luke instead of Matthew. So this is how Luke records the arrest. He says, "But Jesus asked him, Judas, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour, when darkness reigns." So the big difference between Matthew and Luke here is this right here, this 51. Like Luke adds in this detail. So Jesus says no more of this about the violence that just happened, and he heals the guy. Of course, Matthew adds the stuff about swords and things like that. So both of them are remembering specific details. But I think that this actually gives us the alternative, the Christian alternative of what we should be doing when violence is being ramped up or people are talking about violent things. This is how we should respond in these situations, right? This is the Christian alternative to violence in circumstances like this. War is a separate issue. I'm not talking about war. I'm not talking about self-defense in the sense of someone is trying to actively hurt you or hurt someone you love, right? This is someone being arrested, which is very different than, someone breaking into your house in the middle of the night. So we just need to be clear, because then people will take in order to justify violence, sometimes people will take other scenarios and use that as a way to do it, but we're looking at a very specific thing right here, right? Like a state doing something that is wrong, political enemies of Jesus trying to do something to him, and what does Jesus do? Is he actually heals one of the people that is trying to arrest him. And this is the Christian response to violence and political violence, and it's really important that we understand that, because if we begin making excuses, the big scary thing here, and I need to tell you this, is because everyone always thinks about their side doing it. They never think about the fact that when you allow other people to do yourself to do something, that allows other people to do it as well. And so you have to be very conscious of what Jesus is saying here when he teaches us to act in a healing way, in a loving way, in response to attack or political attack or things like that, rather than in violence. And that's important to know, right? We a lot of us probably don't like to hear that in the United States, but that's how we should be acting, right? I mean, I'd challenge people to find me an opposite statement from Jesus, right? I think that'd be interesting, actually. So if you are someone like that, I'd love to see an opposite statement. In any case, I want us to just take this moment to, there's going to be the Republican National Convention, this week, and the Democratic National Convention next week. And I'm hoping, praying, and I want everyone to pray with me, that the leaders of these parties decide to tone down the rhetoric. Some people have said, right, both sides have kind of said that they're going to start doing that. It's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to actually start doing it, but that's a serious way that we can pray for something in our country, and also the way that we can act online around other people, which helps to tone down the rhetoric and the heat that is boiling right now, right? That's the Christian way to carry yourself during this time. So do that, all right? Do that. All right, I'll see you guys on Sunday for worship. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Peace out.